Okay, well, we can get started if you want. So I guess we can say hi first.
Hello. Hi.
Okay, so we're here with Russ Harris. We're very happy you're here. Thank you for agreeing to do this with us. So let's start with the first question. This one's about some of your personal history. So we learned you were a doctor and then decided to put that aside and train on ACT and become a therapist. So could you tell us a little bit about that? Like what led you to that and how the process went through?
Yeah, it was a slow process. I was a GP, a family doctor here in Melbourne, and I just became more and more interested in the psychological aspects of health and well-being. And my consultations with back then I called them patients, my consultations just started getting longer and longer and longer, and just spending a lot more time talking about people's psychological health and their stress and their worries, and less and less time talking about the physical side. Just gradually started to realize that this is what I was much more interested in. Because even when people go to the family doctor, usually there's a significant psychological component. People are most likely to get sick when they're stressed, when they're dealing with lots of worries and issues. Even when you've got physical problems, real physical problems, the psychological side of that has a huge impact on how you manage it and the intensity of it and so forth. Because I just gradually started training in therapy, and the first model of therapy I trained in was actually CBT, traditional CBT. And I started putting aside a half day where I would see clients as a therapist, not as a GP. And then that gradually became 1 day, and then 2 days, and then 3 days, and then 4 days. And then eventually it got to this point where my medical work was really just 1 3-hour shift every month. And I was just scared to let it go, because I thought, if I stop doing this, what am I? I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. What am I? I eventually let that go as well. And that was the right decision, really. Therapy was much more interesting to me, and much more rewarding, much more fulfilling. Didn't pay very well. Over those years, my income went down and down and down. You make much more money as a doctor than you do as a therapist. But my satisfaction went up and up and up. And so I just started experimenting with, learning different models. So CBT was the first model I trained in, but I became very interested in mindfulness and the work of John Kabat-Zinn and mindfulness-based stress reduction. And I was also very interested in the work of Viktor Frankl and logotherapy. And so it was a while before I encountered ACT. And what I liked about ACT was it incorporated the best elements of all the models that I trained in, and also added a whole lot more with this really coherent theoretical framework that really allowed me to bring in everything that I really valued in other models I trained in. I remember the first time I read an ACT textbook, it was a friend said, "You've got to go and check out this ACT stuff." And I went to the bookstore. There was only one copy of the original 1999 ACT textbook, and I bought it. And I went home, and I couldn't stop reading it. I read it all the way through. I was awake until about 5 in the morning, and I finally got to the end of it. And it was like the clouds parted and there were angels flying around, and I could hear the hallelujah chorus, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So it really was love at first sight.
So regarding your work on the happiness trap, could you summarize what you think we as individuals and as society need to change as a concept of happiness, and what are some myths around what happiness is or should be?
Yeah, I mean, the book gets its title because, popular ideas about happiness will actually make you miserable if you hold on to them tightly or base your life around them. And there's a number of these ideas. Probably the most common one is the idea that happiness means feeling good. If you ask most people what's happiness, they'll say it's a good feeling, or it's feeling good. Here in Australia, our dictionary is called the Macquarie Dictionary, and the definition it gives for happiness, it gives a few definitions, but the first definition, happiness is a state of pleasure or contentment. Now, if that's your idea of happiness, that it's a state of pleasure or contentment, it's feeling good, it's a good feeling, well, you can never have lasting happiness if that's your belief, because, how long can a feeling of happiness, a state of pleasure, possibly last? I mean, think of the happiest day of your life. How long were you feeling happy for before there was some frustration or disappointment or anxiety or irritation or something like that? So this is probably the biggest idea that traps us, the idea that happiness means feeling good. Now, the problem is that many people will start struggling with the emotions that feel unpleasant and uncomfortable, trying to push them away, trying to get rid of them, and clinging to the emotions that feel good. And life becomes all about trying to seek out those good feelings and hold on to those good feelings. And this creates enormous problems. And the ancient Greeks had two different words for happiness. So one of those is hegemonia. It's all about feeling good and accumulating good feelings and doing things that are pleasurable and feel good. The ancient Greeks also had the word eudaimonia, which was type of happiness that comes from living your virtues or your moral values. And so Acceptance and Commitment Therapy ACT is much more aligned with eudaimonia than hegemonia. ACT doesn't kind of talk about your virtues, but it talks about your values, living your values, what sort of person you want to be, and the sense of well-being and meaning and purpose that comes from living your life that way. And when you live your life that way, you will feel the full range of human emotions, the ones that feel good and the ones that feel unpleasant.
And since you're on definitions right now, or like your own definitions, could you tell us about the mind from your perspective? How does it work, and what role does it play in our health? And maybe some myth around it too.
The brain, is an organ. It's solid material, whereas the mind is it's basically a term that we use to describe cognitive processes or thinking processes. We're all brilliant at thinking. We think and think and think, and the famous French philosopher René Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." And certainly there is this idea, certainly in many Western cultures, that thinking is the pinnacle of human achievement, and it's all about thought, and it's all about your mind. I think sometimes it's easiest just to talk about the mind as like a thinking machine or a thinking apparatus, or the part of you that does all the thinking. There's obviously different ways that we describe the mind, but most commonly in everyday language, that's what people are talking about when they talk about a mind. And the mind is a double-edged sword. There are some things it does brilliantly well, and there's some things it does that are really problematic. A double-edged sword is great because you can cut with both sides, but it's also easy to cut yourself if you don't know how to handle it properly. And that's what your mind is continually trying to do, help you to get things that you want and avoid things that you don't want. Everyone can relate to that. We procrastinate on things that are really important to do. We may avoid exercise, going to the gym. We may avoid difficult conversations. We may avoid tasks that we know we have to do. We may avoid doing a tax return, and so basically we avoid a lot of stuff. The short term gives us some relief from uncomfortable feelings, but in the long term makes life smaller and creates problems. Or we pursue stuff that in the short term makes us feel good, but in the long term creates even more problems. And so, this is what I mean by the human mind as a double-edged sword. It's really very useful to have this ability to figure out ways to get what you want and avoid what you don't want, but it just turns on us very quickly. You can look at any mental health disorder or any clinical issue that clients present with, and you can see that almost everything the mind is doing that is problematic or counterproductive is basically this problem-solving capacity of the mind that's just taking you down the wrong direction. So, for example, worrying. When you do too much worrying, hands up if you've been awake in the early hours of the morning worrying about stuff. Exactly. And it's like, what is worrying? That's your mind saying, you know, there are things here that you need to avoid, you need to prevent, you need to stop happening. You know, your mind's trying to help you look after yourself, protect yourself, take care of yourself. It's trying to help you, you know, basically get things you want, like safety and security, and avoid things you don't want, all of those dangerous or, you know, anxiety-provoking things that you're worrying about.
I also think it has a lot to do with like your learning history. Like sometimes like when you label yourself, it's kind of like when you label a cup. Like if you see a cup, you label a cup. And if you've been calling this thing a cup for a long time, then every time you see a cup, you'll say cup. Unless you learn that it's also called tazo, like in Spanish. That's how we say cup.
And so, you know, when our mind starts kind of labeling us in a negative, judgmental way, you know, if it says you're a bad partner, or you're a bad therapist, or you're a bad mother, it's basically trying to look out for you. It's saying you need to change what you're doing, you need to do things better. If you don't change what you're doing, if you don't do things better, if you don't sort yourself out, something bad is going to happen. You're going to get rejected, or you're going to fail, or you're going to screw up your children, or your marriage will be over, or you'll mess up your clients. So watch out, you know. And so it kind of beats you up and judges you, but its underlying purpose is it's trying to help save you from bad things happening and help you shape up and do things better. Again, it's trying to help you get what you want and avoid what you don't want, but it's doing it in a way that is so counterproductive. Usually that self-judgment has the opposite effect. It kind of demotivates us, makes us feel depressed or miserable, rather than motivating us to actually do, you know, what's useful and life-affirming. And so you can really look at anything. You can look at, you know, rumination, self-judging, worrying, even suicidal thinking. You know, when people are under great pain and they're, you know, the life is very, very painful, suicidal ideation is very common. And basically what your mind is saying is, you're in great pain here. If you kill yourself, this will stop your pain. This will put an end to your pain. So killing yourself is a way to escape something really unpleasant and to get something that you want, relief from your pain. Every kind of cognitive process that plays a role in mental health disorders and in human suffering, you can look at it in terms of it's always your mind trying to help you avoid things you don't want and get things you do want, but it's doing it in a really counterproductive way. It's that double-edged sword cutting you instead of helping you. Our aim in ACT is to kind of help people kind of recognize when the mind is doing that unhelpful stuff and to unhook from those thought processes, take the power out of them, take the impact out of them. You can't stop your mind from generating these thoughts, but you can take the power out of those thoughts. And then the idea is that ACT then helps you find other ways, guided by your values, of actually helping you, you know, kind of deal with your problems in ways that are effective and life-enhancing.
And now, Russ, a couple of questions about mindfulness. The first is, what is mindfulness in your own words, and what is it not?
There's lots of different definitions floating around about what mindfulness is, and I think if you put them all together and you just simplify it, mindfulness is a set of psychological skills for effective living that all involve paying attention with openness, curiosity, and flexibility. So it's not just one thing, it's a set of psychological skills. You know, for example, mindfully eating a raisin or sultana and savoring the flavor and the taste of it is very different to mindfully sitting with intense feelings of pain and opening up and making room for those feelings. So it's a set of skills for effective living. What all these different skills have in common is they all involve paying attention in a particular way with openness. I may not like or want what's here, but I'm open to it. Curiosity, I'm curious about whatever it is that's here, whether it's something pleasant and wanted or something unpleasant, unwanted. I'm curious and open to it. And it's flexible attention. So, you know, For an example of inflexible attention or rigid attention, think of a 13-year-old boy playing a computer game. He's like glued to the screen, and thieves could come into his house and steal everything, and he would not notice as long as they leave him playing his game. He's got no attention, no awareness of anything else. So that's rigid or inflexible attention. There are literally hundreds of different ways of developing the capacity for mindfulness, and meditation is just a tiny, small subset of all the different ways of developing mindfulness skills. If you look at meditation, there are at least 20 different types of meditation, and some of them are very different to mindfulness meditation because, for example, there are types of meditation where the aim is to have a still, empty mind that's clear of all thoughts. But in mindfulness meditation, you're not trying to do that. In mindfulness meditation, you're very aware of your thoughts and you expect them to keep arising, and you don't try to get rid of them. You notice them with curiosity. So mindfulness meditation is one way amongst many of learning mindfulness skills. And it's good that there are many other ways, because a lot of people find meditation very difficult. A lot of people find it very boring. So we need to give people alternatives. If you...
And another question is, what are some small steps we can do every day or often enough to manage anxiety and become more mindful? Or how do you do this yourself?
There's a few ways to really bring mindfulness into everyday living. Things that you normally pleasurable things that you normally sort of take for granted or you don't really pay attention to. For example, like as I've been talking to you, I've been sipping a nice warm cup of what is it, lemon and ginger tea. This is actually the first time I've tasted it, and now I'm really tasting it and enjoying it. But I've been sipping it throughout our talk, and the other times I was so focused on you and what we're talking about, I hardly even noticed it. So it's just things that we eat and drink, or underneath the table, my dog is here, and she's being uncharacteristically quiet at the moment. Just stroking the dog, petting the dog, hugging your loved ones, all those little things throughout the day that we just take for granted or don't really pay attention to. It only takes a few moments of really paying attention with kind of curiosity and openness and just appreciating these little moments. You walk past and there's these beautiful fragrant roses, but 99.9% of the time you don't even notice them. You're just so busy going about your day. So it's just stopping to appreciate those little things. Particularly useful with eating, with drinking. Having a shower is a lovely experience, the warm water flowing over your body. And most of us, when we're in the shower, we're not really present. We're thinking about what we're going to do later, or, if we can bring our attention to the feel of the warm water and the feel of our body softening up underneath it, and then our attention wanders and we go back and get caught up in our to-do list or and then we bring our attention back to the shower and back to the water and back to the body. Then it becomes a much more enjoyable, much more pleasurable experience. So we can really use mindfulness to, I call these kind of savoring skills. It's about savoring potentially pleasurable activities and really intensifying the pleasure and the enjoyment in them. Another way that we can kind of bring mindfulness quite easily into everyday life is just tasks that we often do on automatic pilot. We do them going through the motions, not really focused on what we're doing. For instance, tasks where we're cleaning the house or, washing the dishes or sweeping the floor. Most of us either do that while we're in our head thinking about other things, or we distract ourselves by listening to music or watching the television or listening to an audiobook or something. If you want to build up your mindfulness skills, then one way to do that is just switch off the distractions and just give your full attention to the activity of washing the dishes or sweeping the floor or stacking the dishwasher or whatever the chore is. Again, these little things throughout the day, just focusing your attention on something, noticing when your attention wanders, bringing it back again over and over again, or doing something that's potentially pleasurable and really noticing what it's like and engaging in it and savoring the feelings of that experience. they're probably the easiest ways to bring it into everyday life.
You make all of this sound very easy. When we start learning ACT or RFT principles, like all of that, it seems very hard. But in our opinion, you're the master of making ACT concepts and processes friendly and practical. So we wanted to know what tips would you give to therapists who have trouble translating and communicating ACT principles to their consultants?
That is seriously, I mean, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. And I work really hard, actually, to try to make things understandable and comprehensible. And this goes back to my time at medical school as a medical student. I really struggled. If you wanted to slap it, I'm not a big fan of DSM labels, but if you wanted to put one on me, then ADHD would fit very nicely. I found it very hard to focus in lectures, very hard to pay attention, had a lot of trouble understanding things. And for my first 2 years at medical school, I failed all my exams. I managed to pass them all on the resits. And what I learned, amazing, it took me so long, but I learned that I couldn't really learn by attending lectures. And what I needed to do was get the textbooks myself, read the stuff myself, and teach myself from the textbooks. And once I started doing that, then I started passing my exams first time around. And it kind of just gave me a passion, I guess, to make things simple and understandable and accessible, because so many textbooks and so much research, not just in medicine, but in psychology, really in any field of academia, is just written in such a jargonistic, heavy, complex way. And there may be a context where that's appropriate, but certainly for therapists that are trying to learn how to do this stuff, or clients that are trying to learn how to do it, that's often counterproductive. I can't remember which movie it was, but it was a lawyer. I think it was played by Denzel Washington, and in the movie, I think it was a John Grisham movie based on a John Grisham novel, and this lawyer would say to his clients, explain it to me like I'm a 7-year-old child. And that always kind of stuck in my head. And I thought, well, how can I explain this to a 7-year-old child? I don't think it has to be as young as a 7-year-old child, but I think if you keep that in mind, how can I explain this to a child? That can be very, very useful, because with a child, you're not going to be using complex terms. You're not going to be assuming the child has this psychological knowledge. If we take, for example, many therapists ask their clients at various times to tune into their body and tune into their feelings and tune into what you're noticing in your body. Now, to a therapist, that seems like common sense. But to most clients, that seems like a really weird thing to do, especially if you've been putting a lot of time and effort and energy into trying to avoid feelings in your body. I think, one of the things that I fell in love with when I first encountered ACT is its use of metaphor. There's so many great metaphors in ACT that really help us to kind of simplify concepts and make them accessible for people. And so I've really embraced that. Having said that, there are some metaphors in ACT textbooks that are incredibly complex and take up 2 whole pages of text. I don't like those ones, but I do like the short, simple ones. I think it's just coming back to how can I communicate these ideas in a way that's simple for people, in a way that people get, and short, simple metaphors are very powerful for that.
Following the subject of professional therapists, we wanted to ask you, what advice would you give our colleagues to prevent and manage burnout, especially when working with very demanding cases?
It's very important to have a little ritual that you can do at the start and the end of a session for yourself. Rather than doing what most of us do, you just rush through to, see the next client, take 2 or 3 minutes to do a little mindfulness and self-compassion practice. Now, I have a little ritual where I sort of put my hands on my body and just send warmth and kindness in and acknowledge that was a really difficult session. Notice what my mind is doing. If it's beating me up, you know, I'm a lousy therapist, I should have done better, I should have been able to help that client. Or maybe it's worrying, oh no, is this person going to kill themselves? Have I kind of done everything possible? You know, starting to notice those processes and practice unhooking from those thoughts and just coming back and just grounding myself and making room for those feelings. And even just taking 3 minutes to do something like that will put you in a much better space for when you see the next client. I can only do what's in my capacity to do. I will just be the best therapist that I can for this session with this client. So kind of starting and ending your sessions can make a huge difference. And then when you're in your sessions, again, it's about being realistic. You can't help everyone. Not every, you know, if you look at the research for ACT, there's a massive amount of research for ACT. There's over 3,000 published studies on ACT. There's over 1,000 randomized controlled trials. It gets good results. But if you look at any one of those studies, it doesn't help everyone. You can't help everyone. So you do what's in your power. You make sure that you're well trained. You structure your sessions. The more challenging the client, the more structured the session needs to be, with an agenda and clearly defined therapy goals and so forth. And you do what you can. And then after a session, reflect on it. What went well, what didn't go so well, what can I learn from this, what can I do differently next time around. And outside of work, have a transition ritual, so that when the workday is over, you do something that clearly, especially important if you work from home, you know, you do something that separates work from home. Okay, the workday is over. That ritual can be anything you want it to be. It could be doing 5 minutes of yoga. It could be making yourself a lemon and ginger tea and just mindfully drinking it. It could be taking the dog for a walk. It could be having a hot shower. It could be going to the gym, but something that is just, the work day is over and now I'm outside of work, and, you know, this is the rest of my life. Not always that easy, but if it becomes a habit, it becomes much more powerful.
To finish the interview, we wanted to ask you for more advice. What advice would you have for those wanting to start their training ACT or on ACT, or those newer in the ACT field?
I think it's very important to, you know, go to a workshop or do an online course. You can learn a lot from reading books, but it's not the same reading textbooks and reading self-help books as it is to actually attending a live workshop or an online training. In workshops and online trainings, you'll get to see what ACT looks like when people actually do it with their clients, and in the best trainings, you'll also get to practice on yourself with your own issues and your own problems. There's so many good trainings really available now. There's also an amazing website, contextualscience.org. So this is the mothership website for ACT and RFT. I'm laughing because RFT is very, very different to ACT. I use the analogy that ACT is like driving your car, whereas RFT is like the engineering principles of the car engine. So you can be an excellent car driver and know nothing about engineering. So I would recommend learning ACT first, and then if you're interested in you know, the more technical stuff that's underneath ACT, and then go on to learn RFT later. There are some people that would strongly disagree with me, but I don't care. That's what I think. So the contextualscience.org website has got a phenomenal range of free resources on ACT and RFT. And it's got all sorts of free resources in languages other than English as well. So that's a really good place to explore and learn more.
Thank you very much. It has been a very interesting interview. I think we have a lot of interesting concepts explained very easily, right? That's what we wanted, because sometimes pop psychology can be very easy to understand too. We wanted to bring this evidence-based psychology to people to understand it, right? So we think we made it, and you made it.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. And it's been a pleasure. Yeah, good questions. Good luck with it all. Remember to stop and smell the roses.